How's everyone today? I have a favor to ask from you. Would you mind doing that? Can I ask a favor? Can you all move forward and closer? I promise I have the deodorant on today, so don't worry. If you just come forward so that we can be one cozy crowd, so that all the latecomers can come in to the back seats. So, and I'm going to involve you all the way through this presentation, so be warned. Right. So, how are we all doing today? Who's feeling really, really good? If you're really good, I want you to scream very, very loudly. I like this. It's starting to get warm. I was wondering if we maybe... Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thank you, sorry. I was wondering if we maybe needed some hot pepper soup to get us going, because we all sound a bit too British, I think. You're all sounding a bit too posh for me. So how are you all doing today? Speak up. Fantastic, fantastic. Now, who has just graduated? Can we put our hands together for them? I can see my friend here. Congratulations. Who is feeling very, very optimistic about the future? Fantastic, fantastic. Be honest, who feels a little bit fearful at the moment? Thank you for your candor, and I'm hoping that through what we discussed today, we help each other, give each other reasons to be hopeful and to be positive. So what I was asked to do today was talk to you about expectations of graduates in the 21st century. And it sounds very, very big, sounds like a really big topic. So what I decided to do, rather than go through a set of bullet points, many of which you can find out yourself, I thought I would share some of my own experience with you, my career experience. And I am hoping that through those few experiences that I share, that you find things that you find helpful on your journey. I'll be very keen to speak to all of you after the session today, because I would like to hear your experiences. I find that usually the most important thing a speaker needs is the ability to listen and the ability to hear. So I learn as much from your stories as I hope you will learn from mine. Next slide, please. So I spend quite a lot of my time talking to graduates, talking to people starting their careers. And I made up my mind when I was starting my career that whenever I would talk about my journey, I would not give you the airbrushed version of my career, because I used to listen to people. I used to go to these career events, and I listen to people talk about their careers, and I think, wow, they've achieved so much. I could never attain to that. And I know that my career has been full of ups and downs, and so I will share some of that with you. And what I hope is that you can take some of that into your journey, and not that you anticipate huge challenges, but you know that whatever you come up against, you have the agency to deal with it. And that's my main message today. And so sometimes I talk to people about their careers, and I've often used the London Underground to explain careers. And there's two reasons for that. Most people think of their careers in a straight line. They think you get into your job, you become an engineer maybe, a senior professional, maybe a manager, and it's just a steady progression. For most people, it looks a bit like this. And sometimes they go back, and sometimes they go forward. And it looks more like think of a child being asked to draw a straight line, and think of the zigzags and, the way it looks. That's how a lot of people's career looks. So that's one reason why I use the London Underground. The other reason is it doesn't matter where you begin. I often meet graduates who are so desperate that their first job must be in a particular location, particular part of the world. And I use the London Underground analogy to say that it doesn't matter where you get on. The important thing, first priority, is to get on. I can see my friend Femi's just arrived, so can we put our hands together for them, please? And Chooks. Next slide, please. So that was my journey. So I grew up in a family of engineers. My father used to say that in the big polygamous African family that he was from, he said he was engineer number 23. Now, I never met all of the other uncles and aunties who were engineers, but I believe him. But that was not the inspiration for my becoming a chemical engineer. My real inspiration, I decided at the age of 9, probably just before the time I took that picture there, on the bottom right, that I wanted to be a chemical engineer. Not just any kind of engineer, a chemical engineer. And the reason is I read a book when I was young, and in that book, there was an evil genius who could use chemicals and solar energy for world domination. And as a good 9-year-old Christian boy, I saw what he was doing, quite horrible things, and I thought, that's who I want to be like when I grow up. My values are different now, I hasten to add. But that whole process led me down a path that ended at the University of Sheffield, where I did a degree in chemical engineering and fuel technology, and then went on to do a PhD in combustion at the University of Leeds. And then it got exciting. Oh, thank you. and that was about 21 years ago. And then it got exciting because I then started to look for work. And my goodness, it was tough. I applied and applied. Just like Sarah said earlier, I kept applying and there was no response. At one point, I thought that somebody must have been having a joke at my expense because I used to go to this library to apply for jobs. And I remember going to the library, applying for jobs, and then I did a bit of a walkabout and I got home. And before I got home, believe you me, I got an email saying, after careful consideration, we won't be moving you further. I thought that was 3 hours ago. How careful could you possibly have been in your considerations? But I kept going. And given that we are sitting around a group of people who are believers, I will also share that in those days I would pray and obviously seek God. And I remember at that time my sister had a picture. God gave her a picture for me. And what she said is she saw me struggling, trying to get in through the door. And she said, I kept trying and nothing was working. Because at that time, I even went through an interview where they said, you did very well, you did what was necessary to get to the next stage, but we can't move you on. So in other words, you passed the exam, but we can't let you in. And so she said, you were trying and trying, and she said, at one point, Jesus came and opened the door from the inside. It was about 12 years later, I would connect what would follow with the words that came in that picture. The time then came, and that would take us to our next slide. I had a trip. I applied for one job, and as God will have it, I eventually got the opportunity to attend an interview. And it was a long journey. I traveled from London all the way to Cumbria, which is as far as you can go in England before you get into Scotland. And you know those places where you drive and you think, I wasn't driving, I was in a National Express coach. But you know those places where you drive and you think, am I driving to the end of the earth? And eventually, I got there, and we got there ready for the interview. And then something interesting happened. We were chatting away in the reception. 2 men came who were our interviewers for the day. They came to do sort of small talk with us. And then after a while, one of the guys looked at me. There were about 7 of us, all PhDs. Some of them had some extra experience on top of their PhDs. So it was one of those situations where you just thought, let me just try. It didn't look that hopeful. But one of the guys who was interviewing looked at me and said, I know you. I just traveled from London to Cumbria, so I said, there's no way this guy knows me. He said, I used to come to your department when you were doing your PhD at the University of Leeds and ask for Richard. Richard was doing his PhD same time as me, and this man was his external examiner and external supervisor. And he would ask me, he said, I would ask you where Richard is, and you would show me where he is. I still can't remember him. There were so many things that went wrong that day, but I did my best, and I went home. And it was a few weeks later, I would get home, and there was this huge, big envelope in front of the door. And of all those 7 people, they'd offered me the job. The challenges didn't end there. It was the nuclear industry. So they do these special security checks. And they did these checks that just lasted for so long. And I remember thinking, I know Osama bin Laden and I look alike, but we're really not related, honest. It took so long. Eventually, while that was all happening, a company I'd done some of my PhD work for got in touch. And they offered me a job. I contacted this company to say, I've now got another job offer. I'm still waiting for your checks. By the time I got home, they said, the checks are over. When would you like to start? And so I ended up with 2 job offers. And in one case, I went on a long prayer and fast to decide which one should I choose. I remember then choosing one of them. But as God will have it, the other company said, would it help if we were a bit more flexible? I said, what do you mean more flexible? It says, if we increase it by another 1,000. I said, yeah, I'll think about it. And they eventually gave me that extra, and that was how I'd started my job. But I want you to just put a bookmark in that story I told you about the person who recognized me. Because the thing I've often said to myself is, thank God I was never rude to this guy. Next slide, please. So I started my job, started working. I've been working now for about 21 years. I lead a team of about 16 engineers at the company I work for as head of process and safety. I teach at the University of Dundee as a visiting professor. I've been a non-executive director, and I'm co-founder of AFBE. And all through that time, I have worked on some amazing things, projects, technologies. I love my job as an engineer. I think we create all kinds of changes, and I really believe we save more lives than doctors. Sorry to any medical staff who are in the room. But that career also had some challenging moments, and those moments began the day I started my job. I remember meeting my boss then, asking him, he asked me about my family. I said my dad was an engineer who worked as an academic, went into industry, and then went back into academia. And I remember when I said that, he said, well, failed engineers teach. And I remember thinking, who says that about a person's parents when they've never met them? But that trend just carried on for the next 2.5 years. There were days when I would post a picture of my nephew on my screen, and my boss would come over to my desk and say, that's an ugly baby. And it carried on like that for 2.5 years. It started to impact on stress levels and all of that. Eventually took a toll on my health. I remember at the time not wanting to think of it as a race-related thing, but I started to come across other engineers of color who were also experiencing racism in the workplace. One of those people was my sister, Nika, who started her career 4 years after I did and went through some of the same kind of experiences. But that moment, which could have completely put me off, actually became a career-defining moment because it led my sister and I to start the AFBE. We were living in Croydon at the time. There was a lot in the news, particularly around youth violence affecting young black boys. And it was a desire to meet other people who are like us, who could support each other in our careers, and then to reach the community. That led us to start the AFBE. AFBE has now impacted more than 20,000 people since it started. We've got around 2,500 members around the country, and we've got close to 100 corporate partners, and we're continuing to drive change. So you will face all kinds of challenges in your career and your life. You should know that you always, always have agency. There will never be a time when you experience things that you can't overcome. So know that. Next slide, please. This brings me to another defining moment in my career. I remember working on a project at the St. Fergus gas terminal. We had a commissioning day, and usually when you commission, you go day after day after day, and until you get the job done. And I remember sitting around these operators. Many of them have been around for 30 years. They understood how this worked. We were trying to introduce a new system to the site. And what I found is, despite the fact that we had some of the soundest engineering, the skill that I most needed in that moment was the ability to persuade these operators that this project was worth doing. And I learned a huge lesson there. Most projects that you will work on, whatever the field, are maybe 10% technical, 90% people. And if you cannot persuade people, communicate in a way that reaches people, you won't succeed. So I hope you all become, if you invest in yourself, if you invest in nothing else, invest in your ability to communicate in different circumstances, because effective communication is a key to your success. Next slide, please. So I've talked about all of that so that I can get to the topic that I've actually been asked to look at, because we are in an interesting stage in our world and in our industry. It is an exciting time to be a professional, and this industry needs you. I speak to leaders all the time, some of the most senior leaders, and they are excited that there are people coming into Aberdeen from all parts of the world, and they are looking for people who can work in those industries. And some of the big trends that we're going to see is artificial intelligence. That ability to shorten to reduce the amount of human intervention required to make things happen through the power of data. Sustainability. Shareholder pressure means that most companies now have the impetus to drive the energy transition. So when we talk about the energy transition, it isn't just warm words. There is actually a genuine agenda to ensure that it happens. Data-driven decision-making. The employee experience. Most companies aren't just thinking about the bottom line when they are assessing their company's performance now. They are also thinking about what you might call ESG issues, and sometimes much more than even the profit margin. And so that's something that we should think about. Changing workplace demographics. You will probably work with a much more international, intersectional workforce than certainly your parents did, and certainly people that have started their career 20 years ago did. And so that requires a mindset shift. There's the question of lifelong learning. So it's no longer about, I did this degree before the war, and I shall do no more learning ever after. It's a case of continuous learning that's going to be required. And one of the key changes that's happened in the last 3 years is this issue of a decentralized workplace. So what does that require of you? Next slide, please. It requires a certain degree of self-awareness. A question I will always ask my mentees when they're thinking of what they want to do. I want to know, who are you? Before you write your CV, can I give you an idea? Go to your friends, ask them to describe you, and make sure that what's reflected on your CV reflects you. I once worked at a place where the manager would ask what our hobbies are, and that became the most important thing. I ran into a colleague at a chemical engineering conference, and he's an expert in dynamic simulation and flare systems. The first thing he asked me is, do you still sing? Because ultimately the workplace is really about that. So who are you? Self-awareness. Leadership. And it doesn't matter that you're a graduate companies are looking for leaders. Leaders aren't the captain of the ship who can dish out orders to all and sundry. Leaders are just those people who have learned how to influence people and influence the direction of travel. So they're looking for leaders. Looking for people who, yes, can work under pressure, have the ability to solve problems creatively, think outside the box, emotional intelligence, the ability to simply to read between the lines and not just take everything that's been said at face value, to manage time and to be commercially aware, to understand how operationally efficient they are within their organization. Next slide, please. So that's what it requires of you. And that is the journey that I am on. And I'm pleased to say that it's been an interesting journey. It's been full of ups and downs. Every day feels like a school day. Some days I feel like I'm on top of the world, and other days I feel like I'm just starting out. But if you persevere, there is light at the end of the tunnel. And just this year, I've experienced some of that. I never thought in my life I would ever meet the king. And I never thought that we would win some of the awards that we've gone to win. I never thought we would get to a point where you get honorary doctorate, a doctor of laws. I thought, I don't know anything about law. But all of these things have come through a season of perseverance and through a season. So I will say, whatever it is that you may feel like, the journey will be hard, harder for some than others. Press on, be persistent. There is no substitute for that. And I think that brings us to the last slide. And you know what I said about the journey being like a tube? So I had a bit of a moment to chuckle earlier, a few weeks ago, when during the National Engineering Day, the Royal Academy of Engineering decided to put a number of engineering icons on the London Underground. And I looked at it and I thought, I can see a lot of names here, and I was surprised to find my name on there as well. And so I wish, I'll move on to the next slide. So I'd just like to thank you all for this opportunity. I hope you've picked up from that some of the expectations that you have, but I tried to put those in my own story, because what I hope is that it helps. I would also use the opportunity to say that the AFBE will work with Creed. We've got IBIM here, who is our transition lead. If you need any support, we run events all the time with companies. Speak to IBIM, speak to me, and also you can follow us on Instagram and find out about the things that we have going on. We've got programs for everybody. So thank you for this opportunity, and I wish you all the best. Thank you.